It's Major Label Debut. This is the podcast about major label debuts. I'm Graham Wright. Story time. It's 2006, New York City. Tokyo Police Club is coming in hot. We're so late for the show that we're supposed to play. Our van broke down on the highway. We had to get towed off the highway. We had to get repaired. We got back on the highway. We're rolling into New York City basically at the time we're supposed to play the show. Our manager lives in New York City. He's waiting for us at the side of the road. We pull over. He hops in. He takes the wheel, handing to us an enormous pizza and 2 water bottles, one of which contains straight vodka. The other contains vodka mixed with 7-Up. So we're fueling up for the gig, and we make it. We take the stage. We play 20, 30 minutes late. Honestly, for us in those days, that's not that bad. But why? Why the big drive? Why all this energy expended? It's so that we could perform for one person, one music industry big deal. Not a record label president, not a radio station disc jockey, not a, platinum selling record producer. No, a lawyer. I know. I had the same reaction hearing that we were going to go to New York to do this command performance for a lawyer that you might have had when you saw that today's Major Label Debut episode is an interview with a lawyer, one Randy Ojeda, a different lawyer from Tokyo Police Club's lawyer, although shout out to Richard Grable as well. But what I learned, and what you too are about to learn, is that lawyers are extremely important in the music business, as they are in most businesses. We talk a lot on this podcast about record deals. We talk a lot about the business, the commerce, blending with the art. And where those two distinct entities meet, the way that they are knit together, the wizard that weaves the spell that binds the art and the commerce, that's the lawyer. When you sign on that proverbial dotted line, above that line is a contract full of legalese and arcane law language that only lawyers really, truly speak. If you want to have success in the music industry, at the very minimum, you need to hire a lawyer to look over your contracts before you sign them. And having one on the team, as it were, on the payroll, can also be really important because they work with a lot of people. They've seen a lot of stuff. They have good advice. They have wisdom. They have good connections. They're good at negotiating the contracts as well as just, vetting them. The list goes on and on and on. And Randy Ojeda, my guest on the show today, is going to explain all about why music lawyers are so vital, even now in what seems like a sort of Wild West frontier version of the music industry. The annals of music history lore are rife with stories of handshake deals done in good faith that then dissolved into mutual recrimination, if not mutual lawsuits. Great musicians have had their artistic development derailed by legal problems. And that, I think you will agree, is a very, very bad reason to derail an artistic career. And a lot of times that could have been avoided with the help of a good lawyer, as you will hear from Randy Ojeda. So if you subscribe to this podcast to hear me talk to musicians or record producers, and you're thinking, a lawyer, that sounds a little dry for me, I assure you, there's a Rosetta Stone nature to this conversation that certainly helped me understand more about all the other conversations we've had. And some of the stuff that we've talked around or alluded to in previous episodes is because we don't speak legal language, and Randy is here to speak that language. He is a great guy. He's a charismatic guy. It was a wonderful conversation. It is not dry. It is only incidentally educational. And I think that whether you make music, aspire to make music, or just love music, Randy has stories to spool out and wisdom to share that is really wonderful. And I think you're all going to get a kick out of it. And so, for free, I now present a consultation with the music industry lawyer. Here's my conversation with Randy Ojeda. thank you so much for doing this. First of all, it's really a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I have many questions about what you do and how it has evolved and how it inhabits the fractured mediascape as it's currently constructed, changing beneath our feet. But I wanted to start because I remember being a young musician and our first manager putting a ton of stress on the importance of having not just an attorney, but a good one, a good music lawyer. And I thought, by way of sort of getting to the heart of the value of a music lawyer, I wanted to ask what the crappiest deal you've ever seen an artist stuck in or almost stuck in is. I know there are confidentiality things that prevent you from telling tales at a school, but being as vague as you feel is appropriate. Yeah,
it was very recently, actually, which is surprising. Like over the last couple months, there was a deal for this pop band that was being formed kind of in the style of a Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, sort of like true, like, you know, not a boy band. This was actually a girl band, but you know, whatever you want to call it, a pop group that was being formed. And this deal was like as insane as I'm sure the deal the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC signed was, you know, which they've made documentaries about how terrible those deals were. And this deal was very similar, to the point where this entity, this management company that was going to form this group, was not only, you know, taking the masters and publishing and songwriting from the artists, but they were going to own their names and their likeness forever, you know, in perpetuity. It was like, this is, you know, they basically were going to own these girls for a decade plus. And like, you know, you can't put out any music outside of this, you know, endeavor. Everything that you write has to go towards this group, all the money, everything. Like, that to me was like pretty exploitative, you know, to have a deal where, you know, you're signing literally everything away just to be part of this project, you know. And there was no guarantee that the project was going to take off. It wasn't, you know, nothing in this industry is a guarantee. So, you know, to put all your eggs in one basket and say like, hey, yeah, you guys control my career for a decade, like, let's see what happens, I think was a big stretch. And especially because it was a young girl pop band. Like, some of the people they were asking to sign this deal were like 16 years old, you know, 17 years old, like, not, you know, their parents were coming to me asking like, what is going on in this deal? And I had to explain, like, I know your daughter wants to be a pop star, but maybe this is not the way to do it, you know? So that to me was an interesting one. But, you know, to be honest, I've seen so many bad deals in this day and age that I could go on and on with horror stories about bad deals. Well, we see illustrated in that one sort of the whole root of the problem of bad deals, which is that, of course, to the powers that be at the very top of the heap, they're in the money-making business. And the most efficient way to make money off musicians is if you could have some kind of vat-grown, totally brainwashed, blank slate musician who you own from stem to stern in perpetuity, because then you don't have to deal with any of the pesky money for paying them. You get to take every cent of it for yourselves. Yeah. And so when you remember to look at it from that way, which is not always easy to do, especially when you're young and someone is holding a contract out to you that sort of, you know, it says your dream will come true if you sign on the dotted line here, the old story. And so having a translator, not just of the legal language, which can be very effective at disguising all of these nefarious intents, but also of just the intent behind these contracts and of, you know, what the company wants from you and what you could want back from them. And that seems to me to be where the music lawyer comes in. Yeah, no, for sure. And what was interesting about that deal in particular, and a lot of these bad deals, is, you know, you hear the term 360 deal a lot, right? And that's basically what we were looking at was a 360 deal where their hands in every aspect of these artists' careers, you know, and that's just not the way the industry works anymore. Like, maybe it was in 1995, you know, but it's not in 2025. It's just not that way anymore, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, it has been just the history of contracts would be a really interesting study, from what Motown artists were signing to what disco artists were signing to what alt rock artists were signing to what pop boy bands were signing with Lou Pearlman or whoever else.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about where the money's coming from, where the money's flowing, and who's sort of got their hands on the puppet strings from how all that works.
Yeah, and it's and like you said, it can be kind of hidden in the contract language. Like on its surface, it looks like it's a good deal, but then you start reading the actual fine print and figuring out exactly how the money is flowing and exactly how the rights are being divided or not divided in this case. And it starts to look pretty scary.
Josh, our producer, and I were in the band Tokyo Police Club together.
Yeah,
and
great band.
Josh in particular, thank you. The internet came up with it. Did you say great name or great band?
No, great band. I love
great
Tokyo
band.
Police
We
Club.
came up with that. Yeah, thank you. We did write the songs.
Yeah.
And thanks very much. And Josh in particular, as time went on, took more and more of an interest in getting under the hood of these contracts that we had signed, and we had we would carve up territories, this and that. And parsing this language and trying to really get to the bottom of it, I really found to be it made you feel a little like you were, when you're dreaming and you can't read words on a page because the letters keep changing every time you look back. That's what I felt a bit like when I was looking at the contracts we had signed, trying to make sense. And you think you got it, and then someone explains to you what it actually means, and it's like the exact opposite of what you thought. Right. So the language really does obfuscate.
Yeah, and it's crazy that like one word can change an entire career trajectory, because it can really affect the entire deal.
Do you have an example of what one such word might be? That's such an enticing notion.
Well, definitely the word perpetuity. I mean, that's, that's one that can change everything. And the thing about having an attorney, is it's not just about, the black letter law and the actual contract itself too, but it's like having somebody in your corner who, at least for me, like I understand the music industry. Like I've been in the industry a while. Like I know everybody's always asking, oh, well, is this standard? And I have to tell them that there's nothing that's really standard anymore. Like it's the Wild West now. Mm-hmm. But I can tell when a deal is overshooting or when it's fair or not, and just having somebody to kind of guide you through that process and say, like, sometimes my job is just to say, hey, this is a pretty good deal. Like I think it works for you as an artist and you should take it, and those are my favorite deals to work on.
It's such an interesting thing. I was thinking about this before we got on, how we've started to talk to a few different people working in, publicity, songwriting, and eventually we're getting this whole taxonomy of the music business together. Yeah. And it's so interesting to me, the different ways that not just one's taste, but one's gut and one's internal compass and one's sort of overall personal vibe, where in, a music manager or an A&R person, we might think, oh, obviously, of course, that person's whole approach, their whole perspective is what they really bring to the table. What they like is what they are paid for. Mm-hmm. And to be a lawyer, there must be some amount of that in it, but also, as you say, you're dealing with the black and white and the legal of it all. And it seems to be like where the bullshit must be cleared away a bit from what you do compared to, you sit down and talk to an A&R person and you can talk for 3 hours and afterwards realize that not one thing of substance has actually been said. Yeah. But it must be a little bit harder or perhaps a little bit easier for a lawyer to speak about what's actually on the paper and what that's actually going to mean.
Yeah, no, it can be challenging too, because sometimes, you have deals that are very, very similar. And I have to say that, like, if you're weighing out two options, these options are basically the same. So you do have to kind of get into the weeds and figure out, like, okay, what are the intangibles here that make this deal more enticing than the other deal? You know, but it's very much a balancing act, So and I used to be an A&R person as well, so I have that kind of perspective that I can bring as well, but definitely a different point of view nowadays as an attorney, of course.
Is that refreshing to come at it in maybe a more direct way?
Yeah, I think so. I think it can be. I think it's, at the end of the day, like, it could be the coolest record label in the world with the best A&R guy and the best publicity team and all that stuff. But if the deal doesn't make sense, the deal doesn't make sense. You have to make sure that it works in the artist's favor.
And as the artist, I can speak from experience, and I'm sure you know this from your A&R days, and I know you do management as well, where, it's like buying a TV or a jacket or something. You can fall in love with the idea of having the thing. You can fall in love with the idea of signing to the cool label with X, Y, or Z qualities. And to look at the things that actually maybe make it an undesirable deal and to leave them enough to actually tear yourself away from that it's so hard. And I'm sure that's what some of these exploitive deals rely on, right?
No, and I've had a lot of situations where I've straight up explained to the artist, like, look, this deal doesn't work for X, Y, and Z. Here's my red lines. Here's all the issues that I found with this. And then they turn around and they still sign the deal, And sometimes that's all I can do, is I can advise, but I can't force you to do or not do something, obviously. So, I always tell them, like, all right, well, good luck. Call me in a couple years when this doesn't work out.
I'll see if I can get you out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were an A&R person before you became a lawyer. So my question, were you a lawyer that decided to go into music or a music person that decided to go into music law, has kind of been answered by that. But could you tell me a little bit about your journey toward where you are today?
Yeah. No, I had a bit of an interesting journey to the law, if you will. But I started out playing in bands. My first band I was in 6th grade. We were called Car Full of Midgets, which probably wouldn't fly today in this day and age, but that was the band name when we were 12. So started, a band when I was young and kept playing in bands. I played bass and sang a little bit and, did that for years, did that through college, and then graduated from college and thought, like, well, the band thing was fun. Like, let me go be a real adult now. And I went to law school. So then while I was in law school, just when I think I'm out, they pull me right back in, right? So, just when I thought I was done with music forever, I met a rapper named IDK who was like starting to come up in the rap scene. And, I was a big fan, and a lot of what he needed was within my wheelhouse and within my skill set. So I was like, well, I'll manage you. Like, I'll read the books and I'll learn and I'll figure it out. And that's what I did. And I managed him while I was in law school and started picking up other clients, some producers, some artists, some bands, basically built a whole management company. And then when I graduated law school, I just said, screw being a lawyer. Like, I'm just going to be a manager. Like, I love this. This is fun and it's rewarding and all my clients are doing great. So let's go head first into management. And I did that for almost a decade, had some great artists, great clients, did a lot of fun stuff. And then, while I was doing management, I also started doing A&R for a company called Symphonic Distribution. So I was doing A&R, I was doing management. I was, just loving everything that I was doing. And then the pandemic happened. And as you know, like, that was the kind of the great reset for everybody, but for musicians especially. Like, my clients went from being on the road 150 days a year to sitting at home, having to go back to day jobs or whatever. And suddenly I couldn't support myself with just management and A&R. So, throughout that time, I had met so many music attorneys and I saw what they were doing. I started to rethink over time what my career goal was and how, there was this need for, the Taylor Swifts, the Drakes, like, they all have powerful, great attorneys that are going to guide them through this music mess. But what about the independent artists? What about the smaller artists, this middle class of music, these people that are doing well enough to need an attorney, but aren't, writing a top 10 hit, So pandemic happens. I study for the bar. I take the bar and then I start this law firm and haven't looked back. So it was a kind of a winding road.
Well, it's a winding road we've all traveled one way or another, over that exact time period, right? Is where you sort of figure out, oh, geez, well, the whole thing that I did is gone.
Right.
So what do I do with this skill set and with these connections and with this, lifestyle I have built around touring and that's happening writ large even before the pandemic with the advent of streaming and with the collapse of record sales and the ongoing slow decline of terrestrial radio and all the other things that are part of this epochal change that I think the music industry is just somewhere in the midst of, maybe at the beginning, maybe towards the end, maybe right in the middle. And so it's fascinating to hear about people's choices and how different people are navigating that. And it sounds like you landed somewhere that's really like an even sharper version of what you were already contributing, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, I landed exactly where I should be, and I'm doing exactly the thing that I think I was meant to do, and my goal was always to advocate for artists and to help people keep creating. If I wasn't going to be a creator anymore, I wanted to help as many creators as I possibly could. And, management was a great way to do that, and still is, especially for a lot of people. I'm not trying to discourage people from management. Like, it's a great hustle, but I already had gone to law school, like I might as well use that degree, and like I said, I just saw such a need for this for newer and independent musicians that I still don't think that need is being filled by most attorneys.
So let's talk about most attorneys, because I want to get to how you offer your services and bill for your services and all that, which seems, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me to be certainly different than any of the lawyers I ever worked with.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to me how within the giant music industry, there are then these separate giant industries, of which music law is certainly one. Not that you're a historian of music law, but can you explain a little bit about how it has traditionally worked and how the sort of institution of music law has been built up over the years?
So there's kind of two, traditionally there's been two sides to legal representation with music, right? And it's, typically how lawyers get paid is they'll either do a retainer and then they'll bill you hourly. This is much more like traditional, even non-music lawyers will do. Like, anybody who's hired an attorney knows what a billable hour looks like. And, every email that is sent, every phone call that's taken, every letter, everything that is done is clocked and timed, and then you're billed accordingly. The other way is, and this is more specific to music, is there are a lot of attorneys that work on a percentage basis. So you'll bring them on kind of like you'd bring on a manager or, somebody else who's taking a cut of your revenue. And that attorney would basically just work without keeping the clock, but then they'd take 5, 7, 8% of your revenue. So those two schools like really only work for people that are doing really, really well, right? I mean, to be able to afford a retainer and afford all the hourly costs that an attorney brings, you got to have some money. And then to make it worth it for both sides to have a percentage deal, you need to be doing really well also. So, I was looking at it and I was like, that doesn't work for most independent musicians. Like, they don't just have like 10 grand to drop on a retainer, and they're not earning enough to make it make sense for me to go on percentage. So I sort of changed the game a little bit, if you will, if I want to toot my own horn,
please.
And I built my practice around flat fees and a subscription model. So essentially, you come to me, I'll give you a set price for whatever the job is that we're going to do, and we'll do it. And then we can kind of pick things up whenever you need it. And that works for most musicians, because you may only get a record deal once. You may only get a sync offer or a sync licensing deal or something like every now and then, so having an attorney that you can, refer things to, pay one price, and then leave it till the next deal is great. It's really like offers a lot of flexibility. But then there's other clients that I have who the subscription model works for them because they have such regular deals. This especially works with music producers. So I work with a lot of producers, especially on the hip hop side. So with music producers and hip hop, like they're doing, some of them are signing like 4 or 5 deals a week, even, wow. With the output of songs that they're doing, and they need a deal for every single song because that's just how it works. So, it makes more sense for them to pay one monthly price and then have me in their corner rather than, a big retainer and hourly billing. Like, let's just make it simple. That's my tagline, is music law simplified. So I want to make this as easy as possible, because what I've learned is the alternative to hiring an attorney is just not hiring an attorney. Yeah. And I'd rather make a little bit less, theoretically, than have artists leave and just sign stuff on their own and not have an attorney. So I wanted to figure out a way that I can do this in a way that's affordable for artists, but still, allows me to like eat and pay my rent.
Sometimes what you need, especially if you're a young band or a young producer or a young whatever, is just someone to explain to you, like we were talking about, what it says in this document. And if you're an indie band in 2025 and you're signing a deal with an advance that's, $2,500, or there's no advance and it's, you're hoping to scrape a few pennies out of it down the road somewhere, the idea of paying, thousands of dollars for a lawyer or, giving them a cut of your tiny little paltry income is enough to make you think, you know what, I can probably figure this out. The number of bands who are probably inputting contracts into AI as we speak and getting completely backwards wrong answers makes my spine tingle.
I've had people, hire me to review their contract and then tell me, well, I put it into ChatGPT and ChatGPT said this. And it's like, well, which one of us has a law degree, me or ChatGPT? Which one of us does this for a living, me or ChatGPT?
Young musicians out there, if you're listening, please do not use ChatGPT to your contract. So let's say I'm selling a beat. I cooked up a kick-ass beat and I'm going to sell it to my fellow Torontonian, Drake. He's hyped about it. He's going to get back on top with this thing. He'll be at the Super Bowl next year getting his revenge. Can you talk through sort of the components that we need for that contract, just sort of as a way of illustrating why it's so important and how all of the nuts and bolts ultimately of how you function in this industry are basically planted in this initial document?
Yeah, well, so there's the main points, right, which is the usage and like the rights being transferred. So, how is the song being used? A lot of people nowadays, Drake would not do this, but a lot of people do what they call beat leases, so they'll sell the beat to several different people. And you have to be very specific about the language and how that's used, because you can't have the same beat on 10 different songs on Spotify, or on YouTube. Like YouTube's going to flag those files as being, derivatives, so you have to figure out, first off, are you getting the exclusive beat rights? Is this now going to be your beat, or are you just basically renting it from them? So that's the first thing. Then second is like, obviously the money. So like, is Drake giving you an advance for this beat? Is he giving you money? And then, what kind of percentage are you getting? And then there's two avenues of the percentages, right? So there's the composition and songwriting side, the publishing, and then there's the master sound recording side. So as a producer, you're technically entitled, you're never entitled to anything, but you should get both sides. You should get a percentage of the master revenue, and you should get a much higher percentage of the publishing revenue, depending on how many producers are on the track and et cetera.
Because you've written part of this song. You created the beat and whatever the chords or whatever. And so that's your composition, which means you literally own part of the publishing, which for the uninitiated is like the songwriting royalties.
Exactly. So with a rap song, like traditionally you have one rapper, one producer. It should be a 50-50 split on publishing. Like that should be the standard. It's not always that case. Sometimes, if you are working with a Drake, like maybe Drake's going to take a lot more of that percentage because it's Drake, and you should just be happy to get your 20% or whatever. But for most situations, that's going to be the 50-50 split. But then we get into all the other stuff. So like with beats, it's very important to have very specific sample language. So did you use any samples? Did you clear those samples? Is this all original work? And now, I'm starting to add in AI clauses too. So like, did you use AI to make this beat? Because that's important too, because we don't know the copyrightability of AI music just yet. Like the court is still deciding what's copyrightable and what's not copyrightable. So we need those kind of AI protections in contracts nowadays too. And then there's just like a whole host of other, mechanical royalties, other warranties and representations. And like, are you legally allowed to sell this beat? Are you, all this. But the nuts and bolts is really, the usage and, how the money's being shared and divided. And that's obviously the big part of it. But there's tons of little things that could really change the nature of work, and how it's used and what rights you're giving.
We have contracts that we signed for records from, 2006, 8, 10, before streaming was even imagined by, certainly by anyone I knew. And in those contracts, again, buried somewhere in clause F on page 19 is the idea that, and this whatever percentage will apply to X, Y, Z, and also future such sources of revenue.
Right.
And only for us then later to have to really go to the mat about, what does streaming count as? Because it's literally not accounted for in the contract because it didn't exist yet. And that must be an increasing factor too, because they keep inventing new ways to either make money or take money from musicians.
Yeah, and that's why, like I said, the AI stuff is so important, because you need to have some language around it, because you just never know what's next. Like Spotify tomorrow could become a fully AI platform or something, and then suddenly you need that AI clause, or else you might not be able to release the music. Like it really, you just never know. So that's part of hiring an attorney, and hiring a good attorney is kind of having that foresight and thinking about those things that you wouldn't normally think about when you're just, doing a deal with a friend or whatever. It can be complicated for sure.
And all of this in a line of work that is frequently conducted between friends, and certainly between people who sort of feel like comrades. Yeah. We all love music. We're all here with the unified goal of getting this beautiful song I've written that we're also excited about out into the maximum number of people as possible. And then we'll all get rich and buy fur coats, and it will be wonderful.
Yeah.
And even when it goes perfectly, 11 years later, someone quits the band, or someone quits the label, or there's, someone comes out of the woodwork that says, well, when we were out drinking that night, I gave you that lyric. And if you don't have anything written down, then
you have nothing. You really, it's the one thing I recommend for every band. So like every, especially, newer bands, young bands that might be listening to this right now, put together a band agreement. The same way you would go, if you form an LLC or a company, you would put together an operating agreement that says, who owns what percentage of the company, what everybody's responsibilities are, what everybody's rights are, what happens if somebody leaves the company. You got to treat your band like a company and do it the exact same way, and have a document that says what happens if a member leaves, what happens if a member gets added, who owns the band name, and that in and of itself is a big thing. Like, look at how many bands there are out there that are the band splits, and then like, Queensryche is a good example. If you like metal, like there's like two versions of Queensryche. Sublime is another one. There's like Sublime, and then Sublime with Rome, and there's who owns the name Sublime. I don't know what their agreement was, but it's like that for a lot of bands. Did
you hear about the Guess Who, Canada's version of that? They recently had a wild thing where it's the exact situation you're describing, where Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman were sort of the creative force behind that band, but they'd long since left it. And somehow the third bass player or something like that had wound up with the rights to the name and was out touring as the Guess Who.
Yeah.
And Burton Cummings got so mad about it that he canceled all of his performing rights agreements. So he was unable to get royalties for his songs because it made it illegal for that band to play, and it forced a settlement, and it all
That's crazy.
Came out in the wash. But one contract, in theory, now maybe 8 contracts caused that problem, but a tighter contract or a more thoughtful contract or a more attentive contract maybe would have headed all of that off at the pass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one thing I recommend to every band, because everything's fine in the beginning. You're all friends, you're all buddies, but first off, money changes people.
Yes.
And people start acting differently when there's a little bit of money involved. And then also just, life and things get in the way, or priorities shift, priorities change, and not having these things in writing just means you're just leaving yourself open for liability down the line.
My Tokyo Police Club ended last year, and fortunately it was all amicably dissolved, and there was no contention or legal proceedings or anything, but we all sort of realized individually with our own sinking feelings, we remembered the moment in our old manager's apartment in 2006 when we were brand new, when he was saying exactly what you're saying. You guys should have, even if it's a 1-page agreement that's a circle divided into 4 signed by all of you, you need something.
Yeah.
And we just dragged our feet and didn't want to do it, or didn't feel like we would ever need to do it. You're 18, you're a band of brothers, and it never got done. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, the band is stepping down and you realize, I really hope the other three guys still feel the same about being a band of brothers in this moment, because if they don't, this could get really, and even if I had decided to just make up whole cloth some story of how I had come up with the whole band or how it was actually secretly my thing, I might not have got the ownership, but I could have cost everyone a lot of money and time and headaches and, dragged everyone through years of nightmarish hell just to be a dick. And sometimes that's how people want to behave. So good advice for young bands: sign a contract with your guys. Just codify it.
And and like you said, it can be simple. It could be, we're going to split everything. Everybody's going to get a quarter percentage or whatever, and we're just going to be Three Musketeers it, one for all for one, and move on. But at least you have something down that you can refer to if there's an issue.
Sage advice. And really, if there's one thing to take away from this, I think that's really it. And also always have a lawyer look at all your contracts.
Yeah.
It's just worth it.
Just have contracts in general. Even you have no idea how many people I have to really smack them over the head about just split sheets, just having that's the most basic agreement that every musician should be familiar with and should be using. That's something you can get a template online. If you don't have one, DM me or email me, I'll send you my split sheet template and you can use it for all of your stuff. It causes, or it fixes so many issues just to have those split sheets, available. And, I know nobody wants to be the guy in the studio who's like, oh, well, let's, you do this paperwork now, I know it kills the vibe or whatever, but what really kills vibes is incorrect songwriting registrations and incorrect royalty splits.
Yes.
That'll really kill a vibe.
So what does a split sheet look like in its most basic form?
Most basic form, it's just, you should do one per composition. So try not to do it for a whole album unless it's truly the same splits for every song, but you want to do one for every work. And it basically should just state, your legal name, your performing rights organization, whether that's, BMI, ASCAP, SOCAN, CSAC, whatever it is you're using, and the percentage that you're getting for that song. And then split sheets are specifically for the composition and publishing side. So it's not, you're not talking about distribution or master splits or anything like that yet. It's just at this basic level, who wrote this song? That's what you need to get on paper. And if you got somebody hanging out in the room and they're chilling in the studio and vibing and they want their 2%, you got to put them down and give them a 2% or whatever. It's if somebody contributes a vibe or a feeling or a word or whatever, you can give them a percentage. It's totally up to you. But that, at the bare minimum, you need that for every song.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, there are no hard and fast rules about how splits get split up. You can give your girlfriend 2% if you feel like it as a present.
Exactly.
Are there standards or, I've always heard this expression, change a word, get a third, which I know is mostly a joke, but say I was in the studio with Drake working on this beat that I sold him and we got our initial agreement all done, but then we went into the studio to work on it together and I actually did contribute, a line. I was like, Drake, I think this rhyme doesn't really work. Let's change it to this other rhyme. And he did that. And then for some reason we didn't have a split sheet, or, 5 years down the road, the song's a hit and I'm looking at my SOCAN and I think, I think I should be getting a cut of that tune that Drake put out. I changed that line. Is there precedent or, general guidelines around how much contribution to a song maybe doesn't necessitate, but should to some degree? Do you know what I'm getting at? Is there any kind of roadmap at all for these things?
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, with rap, it can be easy because, one rapper, one producer, 50-50. That makes sense. But when you get a band, and you start talking about well, how much does the bass line contribute to this song, or how much does, this hi-hat section, work or whatever, that's where it gets complicated and it really just becomes about whatever you can negotiate. I actually had another attorney recently tell me that, my client was a producer and that my client, that they went through the stems of the recording session file and that my client only had contributed like 3 out of like the 46 stems. So they were going to do the math and divide that and give them that percentage. And I'm like, that's not really fair, because the stems don't always tell the whole story. You know what I mean? So like, how do you calculate that? That's the golden question, right? Like that's what people argue about for days and days and days. Yeah.
You're trying to quantify the creative act, which is not quantifiable really at its essence. It's ephemeral in all these ways. And then also this is everyone's contribution. So your egos are wrapped up in it. And I've, my band did some even splits, and then we did some splits that were more ostensibly reflective of the contributions to each individual tracks. And I found that to be like a really horrible, depressing process, because you'd finish some song and I would feel bad about my guy. Oh shit, I wasn't really on my game that day. I didn't really wish I'd had a better idea or been a little faster on the draw with the keyboard part or whatever. And then you get an email saying, hey, you get 6% of that song. And it really is just like, yep, there it is in black and white, my failure to pull my weight on that tune. And that might not be a healthy way to think about it, but it's also, especially in a collaborative environment, can be really hard not to. And I wonder as a lawyer how you approach handling those emotionally delicate issues when your job is to essentially distill them down to something that is emotionless.
Yeah. No, it's tough, because like you said, people are, this is art. It's not, we're not selling widgets or whatever, we're not like, it's not like real estate or something that you can divide, whatever. And yeah, the emotions definitely play a big part of it. I think for me, I just try to get everybody to understand that the contribution is the contribution at the end of the day. Like if just because you're getting 6% doesn't mean your worth is 6% for that song. It just means, that's how it breaks down. It's hard for, I have had some people get emotional about stuff like that and feel like, they weren't getting what they're entitled to or what they're owed or what's fair to them. And, you just got to try to negotiate the best deal that you can. And unfortunately, sometimes that's out of your hands. Sometimes it's not necessarily even about your contribution. It's about leverage. Like, I know we keep using the Drake example, but like I said, sometimes you just got to be happy with what Drake's going to give you. He's bringing so much value just from his name alone that it's hard to quantify.
And so when Drake says, listen, I know you might usually get 50%, but I'm going to get I'm pulling this out of my ass. This is not a description of what Drake has ever done. Yeah. If Drake's people are listening to this, please don't sue me. I can't afford a lawyer. Randy will have to represent me for free in Canada, which I talk about that in a minute. But if Drake says, hey, you're getting 5% instead, I could stand my ground and say, no, thanks, I'll keep my beat. And then Drake will go use someone else's beat and still sell a zillion records and be fine. And meanwhile, now I have nothing. Or I can take my 5% and be grateful for it. This is just how leverage works. This is the business part of the music business.
That's exactly how it goes, And yeah, not saying that Drake would do that or that Drake's people are like that, but a lot of people are, Yeah. Especially, people that have had hits in the past and have credits, like they'll strong arm young new artists because they can, and they might not have contributed much to a song, but they'll take a much higher percentage just because of their name alone. And yeah, that's like you said, that's the business of the business.
The annals of music history are littered with geniuses who either died in poverty or at least lived in poverty for some time because they ignorantly, innocently, naively signed a deal that gave everything they came up with and all of the royalties for it to the head of the label or to an unscrupulous manager or a psychologist or whatever else. And it's a tale as old as time, and it's still happening. It's still happening to this day.
Still happening, and especially like I recently had a client who was very big in a certain Caribbean nation. Let's just say that. I don't want to be too specific about it, but yeah, they're, and in this country, like there was like one guy in the whole town that had the studio, right? And like everybody would go and record there and do their thing there. And then that was the person that would upload everybody's music to Spotify and to Apple Music. Suddenly that person has control of everybody's music just because they were the ones that had the access, but they didn't actually necessarily do anything for the project, and this client had come to me and said like, I'm trying to regain control of my catalog. I never signed anything with this person, but because they had the keys to the car, they're the one driving now. And that can be a bad situation too. And that happens, you know, yes, it happens internationally in smaller countries and things like that, but it also happens in the States and Canada with people that just aren't familiar with what is fair and not fair.
I don't know if this has gotten better or worse or just different with the advent of the internet, but if you're from a small town and you don't have another person that you know personally that's experienced with this stuff, and you just know you have a dream of making beats or writing songs, and someone comes along at all who seems to exude any kind of expertise or willingness to help you, that person becomes your whole universe. And so, you know, if you are an unscrupulous dealer, it's a great business to get into, because there's a lot of naive people with dreams out there. Yeah,
and there's just a lot of fraud in the industry. Like, the industry is kind of built on fraud in many ways. You know, it's like some of the biggest even companies are not treating their artists correctly, or not, you know, not playing fair. And it's just, like I said, I like to be an advocate for the artist, and I hope that I can help in those situations, and sometimes I can't. It's just how it is.
What are some of the common red flags you encounter in contracts nowadays?
Nowadays, I mean, let's say you're signing a distribution deal, right?
Yep.
A distribution company nowadays might take 20%, 30%, 15%, whatever it is, depending on the level of service they're providing. But then you need to be very careful about the usage of that. And like, for example, if you're signing a distribution deal, you're putting out a record, how long does that record have to stay with that distribution company before you can move it to another company, move it to your own company, whatever? Like, how long do they have that for? You know, how long's the term? And then also, you know, another big red flag can be like, you get these offers with massive advances, but you need to be careful about how you're supposed to recoup that advance. You know, what specific items go towards recoupment, and how that's being accounted for and how that's being calculated, because you could end up in a situation where you're stuck in this deal forever because you're never going to recoup that advance, because the label has the right to, you know, throw all their expenses on top of your advance too. And they're just going to keep racking up bills. Like, yeah, they're flying you out to LA and putting you up in a hotel and sending you to the studio and doing all this stuff, but you're going to pay for all that. You're going to be stuck in that contract until all that's paid back. And then a lot of these companies want you to pay back. Obviously, they don't want to just make their money back. They want to make something off you. So it might say like, we have to make 120, 150, 200% of the royalties, you know, of the advance before we let you out of this deal. You know, that kind of trips people up a lot, because they just see this big number. They say like, oh, I'm getting this massive advance, but you don't realize there's a lot of strings tied to it. And there's a lot of things that need to go right for this to work. You're spending your own money a lot of the time. A lot of the time. It seems like someone else is putting down the card. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of things like that. Like, you know, for example, one thing I see a lot is like, let's say somebody has a big hit independently, you know, and then they sign a label deal or a distribution deal or a publishing deal, whatever it may be, afterwards, after they have this big hit. A lot of times the language in the contract will say that even though you're folding this big hit into the deal and, you know, the company's going to make money off of the hit, your advance can only be recouped from new material. And that big hit that you had, even though they're going to collect money off of it, it's not going to count towards your recoupment. You know, and that can be a really big deal if your hit is your hit, you know what I mean? So just little things like that you wouldn't really necessarily think about or argue over, you know, can be very important for the contract. And that kind of like, you know, they call it Hollywood accounting, double dealing. That's just, it makes legal sense, but not like logical, emotional sense, where you're like, well, you've made $1 million off our record, but we haven't recouped. Right. Because you're only recouping off such and such percentage of it. And meanwhile, the expenses are going into that pile, but the earnings aren't going into that pile. Exactly. And so you're, I won't say getting rich. No one's getting rich off Tokyo Police Club, but you're making real money, and we're stuck in this contract that we'll never get out of because somehow all that money you made isn't part
of the part of the contract that matters for us.
Yeah.
And you and I could sit down and go through it line by line, and you would explain exactly why this is how it's written. And I don't know if you would do this, but many lawyers would say, and this is how it's done. This is just the industry standard.
Yeah.
And it's something you got to get used to. And again, if you have someone giving you good advice on the front end, at least you understand what you're in for and you can make choices based on that.
And that's the key, because a lot of times you don't have leverage. So you can't, I would try to negotiate that out of any deal. But if that's not going to work, then at least you understand what you're signing and what you're getting into, so you have those expectations.
Yep.
And there's ways to, specifically when we get into the advances and like royalty recoupment and all that kind of stuff, there are ways to make it safer for the artist, or put a cap on expenses, or, require written approval for certain things and make it more fair. But that's the difference between having an attorney and not having an attorney, is if you don't know what you can push on and what you can pull on, your deal's going to be the deal.
I know this is no longer as big a concern as it once was, but can you explain about packaging fees?
Yeah. Honestly, not something I see all that much anymore.
Well, my understanding from reading the Donald Passman music industry book, which was recommended to me in the old days, is that packaging fees sort of were where the record label would say, look, part of any deal, part of any breakdown of where your royalties come from and what the album earns versus what it costs is the expenses. And one of the expenses is manufacturing the thing. We got to print the records. We got to print the tapes. We got to burn the CDs. And the packaging fee started as sort of part, or I don't know if it's a fee or whatever they call it. Packaging is the word I remember. It was ostensibly for that. It was for, we got to put the CDs in cases, we got to get record sleeves. But it became sort of a loose, ephemeral place for them just to inflate basically the cost of every unit so that they could account dishonestly and say, well, listen, man, there's like a $7, somehow there's $7 packaging fee on every unit. So you'll never recoup, because it costs so much money to make a CD that it's, whatever you sell it for, it won't work. Is that about right?
Yeah. That's kind of it. And a lot of times they'll hide. And again, this doesn't happen as much anymore because packaging is like, how many people are selling physical units? Not that many, So, but that would be a place where they would inflate the fees to keep you in recoupment, because it's almost mysterious what the actual manufacturing costs are. Yeah. Like $7 a CD would be insane, but they could claim that, and then, you got to go to the audit table and get an accountant and figure out if that's actually the case. And most artists don't have the time or resources to do something like that.
So my understanding is that for many years, until people got wise, packaging was sort of the flagship scammy part of any record contract. And my question for you is, has that been replaced? Is there any flagship scammy part of contracts that you see all the time now?
Yeah. Advertising and marketing fees. That's the big thing.
You can just make them up.
Yeah, you really can. And especially nowadays too, hey, we did $100,000 in Facebook ads or Meta ads or whatever. We did, we bought this, digital ad space on Stereo Gum or Pitchfork.com or whatever. And those costs can just, they can be astronomical. And then also it's tough because the better a record does, typically the more they're going to put into marketing. So if you're standing behind marketing costs and you're not getting paid till those are recouped, good luck.
Yeah. My favorite was sometimes radio stations would try to get you to play a show, and they would say, hey, we're not going to pay you money for the show, but we're going to give you, and it would always be it would be like $1.5 million worth of on-air promo.
Right.
Well, who decides what that is? That just someone, it costs $1 million for the DJ to mention you once. So you're done.
Yeah. That kind of thing is crazy and is even more difficult now because of digital marketing and the internet. And it's those costs can skyrocket dramatically.
So conversely then, are there places where you've seen the agency of artists and the sort of, where the power and the leverage resides move towards the artists with the advent of streaming? And TikTok is something that I don't even understand legally, if it even has a legal component to it. But obviously everything has changed even since I started doing this, even since you started doing law.
Yeah.
Are there any positive movements? Please give me hope.
No, there is actually. Honestly, in many ways, there's never been a better time to be an independent artist, because it used to be, and this podcast is called Major Label Debut. It used to be you had to sign to a major or a bigger indie label to even attempt to make a dent in the industry. But now through independent distribution, through places like DistroKid and TuneCore and CD Baby and Symphonic and all these different companies, like you can just put out the music that you want to put out whenever you want to put it out. So if you're smart with your strategy and your own marketing, and you know how to build your own brand, you can circumvent the labels completely and just release music on your own terms. And there's a lot of artists that are doing that to various degrees of success. Like, I know he kind of fell off a bit, but Chance the Rapper, I always say, is a great example of somebody who has been fully independent his whole career, and he's a household name. He was on The Voice or whatever, so like, or whatever show he was on. I can't remember. One of them. He was in a Sprite commercial. I know that, that didn't used to happen to independent artists, but I have a ton of clients, fortunately, who you would never really know their name. Like they're not household names, like they're not major artists, but they're making a living from their music just by releasing consistently and having a good plan for rolling that out, and it's unfortunately the downside to that is that you need to be just as good of a marketer as you are a musician nowadays. Like, it's all about promoting yourself and building your own brand, as opposed to just releasing the music and handing it off to somebody who's an expert in that. So you kind of have to learn more disciplines than just playing music and writing songs. Like, you have to do so much more nowadays. So that's the hard part. But the good thing is that it's possible and you can do it, and you can make, you may not make millions of dollars, but you can have a living in this industry, from your bedroom. And I don't think there's ever been a time where you can do that until now.
It really is amazing, yeah. And it almost, absent everything else, you'd think, it's just a perfect utopian time to be an artist. Right. And well, it's not quite that, but
not quite that. And the problem is that the good thing is it's accessible for everybody. The bad thing is it's accessible for everybody. It's like now there's no gatekeepers anymore in terms of getting your music online. Like, anybody can do it. And that's a great, wonderful thing. But at the same time, we're seeing like hundreds of thousands of songs dropped every single day. So trying to cut through that noise is the real difficult part.
People will say to me sometimes, especially, in the later years of Tokyo Police Club, we would even kick this around internally. Like, oh, do we start a Patreon? Do we start a subscription, a Substack, this? Everyone's got $5 a month, $10 a month to give to their favorite band. Well, geez, if everyone that streams our songs gave us $5 a month, we'd have it made. And then you realize that even if everyone has $5 a month, most people like more than one band. And so now instead of people paying $10 a month for Spotify, or even having a $200 a month CD budget, like some super fan might have had 20 years ago, people could be dropping $1,000, $2,000 a month just to access the music of the, handful of bands that they're into. And then all of a sudden you're in a knife fight for people's attention, and it starts to look a little different.
Well, and now it's like, back in the days, you would buy a CD and you'd put it in your car, and it's the thing that you would listen to for however long it was in your car until you bought the next CD or whatever, Yeah. But now everything's on everybody's phone. So you're not just competing with the music world. I mean, you're competing with every single app and every single thing, and Netflix and, all this stuff you're competing for everyone's attention, and that's the real difficult thing.
Deep cuts from 30-year-old Radiohead records are now the hit. So you're not just competing with all the new music, you're competing with all the music that ever is getting a second chance, which now for a retired guy like me is very enticing, because I could turn off Do Not Disturb after this interview and discover that some Tokyo Police Club random deep cut has gone viral on TikTok, and happy days are here again.
Yeah, no, and that very, very easily could happen. But to go back to my main point for this whole conversation is, that's why it's even more important for you to register everything appropriately, have your contracts, have your splits, because like, you may put out a song and nothing happens for the first 10 years, but 10 years down the line, it could be the next big hit, It could be they'll put it in the new season of Stranger Things or whatever, when they reboot Stranger Things, and it's based on the 2000s, and then there you go. Like, now, Tokyo Police Club is the next Kate Bush,
God, wow. Yes, any music supervisors out there listening, please feel free to make Tokyo Police Club the next Kate Bush.
Yeah, let's do it.
Changing gears entirely, because I think that's pretty much that. You manage acts as well still, right?
Yeah, I manage like one band, mainly this band from Chicago called Ganser.
Yeah, I was listening to them before we got on the horn. They sound great.
Yeah, no, awesome band, post-punk. Just put out a record earlier this year. I'm biased, but one of my favorite records of the year. And, they did it with Angus Andrew from Liars.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's why it sounds so sick. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. He produced it and really added a lot of, those flourishes and those sounds to it. But, great band, super hardworking. I was managing a bunch of bands when I started my law firm. But like I said, a lot of people had to kind of quit what they were doing and shift gears. But they released an album like July 2020. So it was like right in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah.
We were doing the album cycle and I couldn't just leave them in the lurch. And then, I just love them so much. So I just have to keep working with them,
How does it work in a situation like that legally and ethically for you to, do they have a different lawyer? Do you choose to give them advice? Are you even allowed to give them legal advice? Do you have to be careful?
No, I do need to be careful. And, I'm always very explicit, like, I'm giving you this advice as your manager, but I have everything, double checked by another lawyer, have everything like there definitely can be a conflict of interest there for an attorney who's also a manager. So I do need to be pretty careful, but obviously, my advice and experience can kind of bleed into both aspects. So there's some things I can't really turn off.
Yeah.
But, they're getting good advice, but it's not, I'm always very explicit. Like, this isn't my legal opinion. This is just me as your manager.
You must be able to move a little more freely when you're not wearing the lawyer hat. It seems to me that lawyers are bound by more like literal rules that they have to be accountable for than most of us in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. There's the rules of professional responsibility, which a lot of lawyers don't follow, and are not particularly professional or responsible, but I'm big on that. And, I give a lot of, so like I have a Discord page or a Discord server for my law firm, and a lot of like artists and producers and stuff are part of it. And they ask questions in there, and I have to be very specific about like, I can generally answer things, but once we're getting into specifics about legal advice, you need to book a consultation, or we need to take this offline. Like I can't just put that out in Discord land, So yeah, as a lawyer, you do need to be careful about certain things, but luckily I haven't gotten into any hot water yet.
You don't seem like you're an unscrupulous guy based on this conversation, I gotta say.
You'd be surprised, sir.
All right, well, I do have a drawer full of contracts to go over for the next hour of our podcast. It's fine.
Let's
hypothetically. Did you as a law student or later do any, like how does one get into the music or entertainment stream of law specifically? It's obviously not an entire other degree, but there must be some learnings.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, just so like I said, my path was very different. I was managing and doing a whole bunch of other music industry stuff. So I kind of fell into the music industry first and then used that to build my practice. Mm-hmm. But if you were just in law school and you wanted to be an entertainment lawyer or a music lawyer, there are classes, obviously, like there's, my law school offered, they always mixed it with sports. It was a sports and entertainment law course. And I was like, I like sports too, but like it's very different things, But there's copyright courses, there's trademark courses, there's definitely things that you can take to kind of get a leg up on the law side. But I always say the law part is really easy to learn. If you can go through law school, you can figure out entertainment law. It's the business and learning the industry that's the hard part. So I always recommend to law students, like, volunteer at a small label if there's one in your neck of the woods, or work with a manager, or do, just get in the industry somehow. Yeah. Volunteer, learn, intern, whatever it takes, so that you can, master the ins and outs of the business. And then once you have your law degree, you can do whatever it is that's laid out for you,
I was very surprised in the early days of our career when our manager who was sort of one of the first people we put on the team, he was really insistent that a good lawyer was kind of the most important next component, who would not just help us with all the things we've talked about today, but would be another person involved in the strategy and the team building themselves as we, we searched for all the different people that we worked with for a while. How does the lawyer's perspective add to the team in more ways than just like you can read a contract and understand it?
That is a really good point. And the Donald Passman book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business. I mean, first off, Passman's also a lawyer, so he's a little biased too, but he says in the book, like, the first person on your team should be a lawyer. And I think it's because the way you're kind of trained to think as a lawyer, it sounds like devious or whatever, but you're always kind of looking out for the worst case scenario. What if this doesn't work? What if, and I feel like as a manager, you're kind of the opposite. Like, you're kind of optimistic about everything. And you're like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. And this tour is going to be great and blah, blah, blah. And, you don't always stop to think about, well, what if the tour loses money? What if we get into a car accident while we're on the road? What if, do we need gear insurance? Things like that. Like, managers aren't always thinking about that. They're trying to make the next deal, the next connection, and move everything forward. The manager's making you money. The lawyer's trying to make sure that you keep your money. You know what I mean? So I think having a lawyer on your team is super helpful for figuring out what to do and what not to do. And I think, to toot my own horn, like, I think I have a pretty unique perspective because I was a manager and because I did A&R and because I did all these other things in the industry. I can give you that legal perspective, but I also have my background in all the other things.
And I guess also the lawyer in the music industry is the one person on your team who cannot be in college still. You say you started managing a band when you were in law school, and plenty of managers are just your pal. A lawyer has to have at least gone through law school and passed the bar exam.
At the very least, yeah.
And so here's like an adult on your team. And that alone, when you're starting a band, especially if, like us, you're 18 when you're doing it, is very valuable to have someone who can just, as you say, sort of like take a breath and see the big picture rather than just getting so excited about the momentum that you have. And that momentum, as I've learned and as lots of people have learned, can carry you over some bumps that maybe you actually would have been better off like stopping at and paying attention to for a minute, because down the road you realize the suspension on your metaphorical van has been all batched up in a way that if you'd known the bumps were there, if someone else was helping you drive, maybe you would have gone over them a little more differently.
Yeah. I love the van example. That makes perfect sense to me.
The metaphor of my life. Do you still play music much?
Yeah, I pick up my bass every now and then. I don't really like play in any bands or anything anymore, but once a musician, always a musician, I feel like. Amen. So I'll never, I always have my bass set up. I should bring one into this office, but I don't have any here.
It's funny. I've seen a lot of guitars in lawyers' offices who aren't music lawyers. They're just like guitar owning lawyers. And there's not an amp or a patch cable, and the guitar is suspiciously dusty, but it's obviously expensive. Yeah. So you need to bring in a played instrument to make up for the transactions.
I'm with that. I mean, I've got my focus right and everything here, so I could, just plug in and jam out if I wanted to.
We could be jamming as we did this interview.
We could.
And then afterwards, we'll sign the split agreement and it will be completely above board, black and white, no fuss, no muss, and we'll sell it to Drake.
Done. Easy.
Randy, this has been truly educational for me. A lot of this stuff I probably would have been better off learning 2 decades ago or so, but better late than never. And I'm sure there's people out there who have been taking furious notes. So really, thank you so much for sharing the wealth of your experience with us and with the listeners.
Of course. Thanks for having me. And, thanks for doing what you do. I love this podcast.
Thank you.
And, let's get to 100 episodes.
Let's get to 100 episodes, and we do it by always saving the most important question for last, which typically I ask the musician in question, when you were making your record, what were you eating? So my question for you is, when you're, crunching the numbers, poring over the deals, knee deep in paperwork, how are you sustaining yourself?
My wife would say not well. She would say I need to eat better. But, I got to shout out, I guess it's my favorite restaurant now. It's literally right next to my office. There's a McAllister's Deli. I don't know if you've been to McAllister's. No. They have a McAllister's Club sandwich that I adore, and I eat it way too often. that's how I'm sustaining myself with sandwiches and Arnold Palmer's sweet tea and lemonade.
No more martini lunches, I guess.
No, not much of that. I spend, I do have, some fun lunches, but I'm more of a studio rat. I want to be, if you really want to hang out with me, like invite me to the studio and I'll come and be a fly on the wall and hang out there. I'd rather do that than have lunch.
I'd rather do that than most things, honestly. And I get to do it less and less. It costs a lot more to go into the recording studio than it does to cobble it together in your home studio that now we basically all have. And I really miss just sitting, I'm not even contributing, just sitting on the couch, eating a burrito or drinking a beer or coffee or both most of the time.
That's it. That's what I like to do. I just, just let me be a fly on the wall. I won't say anything. I just want to sit and enjoy the experience.
That's great. And it's great to, and I'm sure you're not the only music lawyer who still loves it, but it's just great to hear from someone who's working in it and still feels that romance. Yeah. It's easy to get cynical and it's easy to forget. And so, and you're looking at the numbers and the fucking clauses all day. It would be really easy to ruin the magic, but it doesn't sound like it has.
Yeah, it hasn't ruined it for me. There are definitely times where I just can't listen to music, a day or two goes by where I'm like, I'm just going to listen to podcasts or whatever today. I'm not going to put any music on, but I'm big on New Music Friday. So every Friday I listen to, I put together, all the press releases that I get, all the people DMing me their track links. I put everything into a big playlist. I listen to all of it. And then I save the best stuff, to listen to again later. And then that's, I think for this year, I'm at 2,000 songs that I favorited, so.
What are you excited about lately? You've said Ganser.
Yeah. Love the Ganser record. Who else am I excited about? Julia Wolf, one of my favorite artists right now. I work with her and her producer Scro, who is another artist I'm super excited about. Scro makes like Julia's music is this angsty alt rock kind of stuff, but Scro makes almost heavier, screamo, almost metal stuff, and cool. It's he's just really talented, and I'm always excited when he drops new stuff,
And as a lawyer, I imagine you have a little more leeway to work with artists out of any genre you like versus often a manager or label, they need to specialize or they choose to specialize. But.
Yeah. And I have a little bit more leeway. I also, most attorneys will take any client that comes through the door. I am a little bit more discerning, because so much of what I do too is about my relationships and my, I'm, in essence, co-signing a lot of these artists. So if you're not professional, if you're not doing things the right way, and if your music sucks, I'm not going to share that with my buddies in the industry because I don't want, I want everything that I send to people to be of a certain quality.
Yeah.
So I do try to maintain that standard, but any genre works for me.
Well, and speaking of scams, there's a whole sub music industry because it's sad to say, but there's plenty of people out there who dream the dream who just for whatever reason, it's not going to happen for them. They don't have the talent or they don't have the work ethic or the whatever it is. There's a bazillion reasons. It's a hard thing to get into. And there's plenty of people out there who are more than happy to take their money.
Yes.
I think it's pretty typical. Now, you as a lawyer are literally getting paid by artists, so that doesn't apply here. But oftentimes, if you're paying money to a label or an agent or a promoter to do a show or something, that's a orange flag at the very least.
Yeah, no, definitely a red flag. If you're paying to play, something's wrong.
Yep. They're supposed to be stealing your money from your royalties. That's legitimate.
Right, exactly.
If they're taking the money on the back end, it's all above board. But if they're taking it right out of your bank account, that's sketchy.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's unfortunately how it is.
There's a right and a wrong way to get robbed in this business, and you got to keep them straight.
Right. Got to get robbed the right way. Yeah.
Well, Randy, thank you for everything you've done to help musicians get robbed the right way. We appreciate it, and that's the name of the game. And we hope you keep doing it with success and joy for many years to come. And we'll meet up again and have a sequel to this episode sooner or later.
I hope so. Yeah. Anytime you want me back, I'll be. I'm here, and hopefully I'll be in Toronto at some point.
I would love to buy you a drink.
I would accept said drink and buy you one in return.
It's a undated date.
Perfect.
Randy Ojeda, music lawyer extraordinaire on the Major Label Debut podcast. I feel a little more equipped for my next contract negotiation, but I'll probably still hire a lawyer. I'm in Canada, so I don't actually think that I could hire Randy. I think I'm in the wrong country and there's different bar exams. But if you're in the United States, if you're making music, making art, if you need someone to advise you, look over any contract, etc., Randy is a great option. His website, randyojeda.law.com. That's Randy is R-A-N-D-Y, Ojeda, O-J-E-D-A, law, L-A-W, dot, he's like a period, com, C-O-M. So now you know how to find him. Or just consult with any lawyer. Genuinely, I have given this advice a lot to a lot of musicians. People don't want to pay for a lawyer. People don't want to go through what seems like a very boring and often kind of anticlimactic process where actually nothing in the contract does get changed. But let me tell you, both from my own experience and the experience of many people that I know, get a lawyer to look over your shit. Never sign anything without a lawyer looking at it. Everyone gives that advice. It's obvious. And yet, people still don't listen. There have been times in my career where maybe I didn't listen, and every single time I regretted it. It's not always the sexiest expense on the ledger, but it's not one that you're ever going to regret. Contracts still make the world go round, for better or for worse. This is a show about art and commerce. And as I said in my introduction, you need a lawyer to weave the spell to combine those two things. So my sincere thanks to Randy for fighting the good fight and for having a great conversation with us on the show and taking the time to explain a lot of stuff that probably to him is very mundane and obvious, but to me is brand new information. And it's just another wonderful conversation on Major Label Debut. How do they do it, folks? Happy New Year. This is the first MLD of 2026. This is the third year in which we are making the podcast now. We started at the end of 24. We went all last year, and we're going to go all this year too and beyond. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. We have a lot of great episodes coming up with Greta Morgan about her amazing book, The Lost Voice. Steve Bays from Hot Hot Heat, a guest that I wanted right from the jump, and I finally lassoed him and got him on the show. We had a long, wild, sort of unpredictable conversation that I really left on a high, and many, many more. So hang out with us this year. We're so glad to have you around. Please continue to, like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And I'm always saying now, check out the back catalog of MLD, because we've got a ton of really great episodes just sitting there waiting for you to listen and enjoy. And we truly do appreciate it. Major Label Debut is produced, as always, every year by my friends John Paul Bullock and Josh Hook. Our theme music is by the wonderful Greg Alsop. We are, of course, present across all of the social media spots and podcast places. And we're out there, shoveling content into the content furnace. So when you pass it by, give it a heart or a thumbs up or whatever it is they're doing. Nowadays, it really helps us, and we appreciate it. That's all for the show this week. Thank you for listening. Major Label Debut will return with more tales from the intersection of art and commerce. So long.